uncovering those triggers, recognizing that whenever I get angry or whenever I get frightened or whenever I find with me I get physically sick, then I'm triggered. And so then it's up to me to try and discover what the trigger is about. And by doing that, I help myself to heal and become the person I was created to be.
You're listening to the Feed Your Wild podcast, a conscious lifestyle show about all things nourishing for your body, mind, and soul. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, and join me for candid conversations with changemakers, exploring health and wellness, food as medicine, intuition and spirituality, and nature-based practices that will transform your health and feed all parts of your wild self. Hey, welcome back. This is your host, Vanessa Rodriguez, functional nutritionist, Akashic record reader, and intuitive nourishment guide. Today, we are talking about trauma. So much of what I see clients and family members and my greater community, what I see out there related to so many of the complex and chronic health issues that we're seeing are inextricably linked with trauma. It doesn't mean that it is for everybody, but I cannot tell you when we get to the point where it's, these extreme complex cases, there is almost always some thread of trauma that's involved. And it's so important to look at a truly holistic approach. So while, yes, we are working on the groundwork of diet, nutrition, food as medicine, lifestyle, herbs, possibly supplements, and a variety of different practitioners that you might need to help support you, as well as your own healing tools that you've acquired throughout your life. I cannot stress the importance of really looking at trauma and where this might be impacting you on your healing journey. Today, we have Liz Mullinar. You're going to hear about her story of founding Heal for Life, which is a foundation that she created to provide trauma recovery programs for a couple of decades now. She recently wrote a book that's a step-by-step guide called Heal for Life: How to Heal Yourself from the Pain of Childhood Trauma, based on the Heal for Life model that she created that's helped over 8,500 people self-heal from trauma. This book demonstrates how to transform painful trauma memories and emotional triggers into permanent healing. I received a copy of the book and read it. It's a very quick read in that the way that she writes it, it's very easy to read, which I think is so important when we're talking about these really complex issues from, psychoneuroimmunology, brain function, and how that affects our health and our emotional and mental capacities and health, and also how to begin to work through trauma and heal. And so I think she did an amazing job at putting a ton of different information and practical tools and practices to help the reader on their path of healing trauma. And the awesome thing is that 100% of the book's proceeds go back to Heal for Life to pay for survivors to attend her programs. She's based out of Australia, and I know that I have quite a few Australian listeners, which is amazing. I love you guys. And so if you are, I know Australia is huge, so if you are in the neighborhood or you feel called to reach out to Liz, she has made herself really accessible. She's so inspiring, and I know that you're going to really feel that and literally hear straight from her this amazing energy that she has that can inspire us to continue on what can be a really challenging and difficult path. Before we get into some of the nuances of the topic that we're covering today, I did want to mention we're coming really close to our first workshop intensive for the Herbal Anatomy series. This is through Hawthorne Institute, and I am co-teaching with Anya Robinson, who was on the podcast. And if you haven't heard her interview yet, I definitely recommend. It's a couple of interviews back, so make sure you check that out. She and I are offering an Herbal Anatomy series of 5 workshops in 5 months on 5 different body systems. Each workshop is 2 days long. They are deep dive intensives. So this is not a light workshop that's, 2 hours each day, where we're spending the whole day together on Saturday and Sunday for each of these intensive. And the first of the series is the, of course, foundational digestive system intensive. That's coming up March 21st and 22nd. We only have limited spots available because this is in person in a smaller space. So if you are called or interested in the Herbal Anatomy series, which is really diving into clinical herbalism, the skills of clinical herbalism, the foundations of nutrition, in-depth anatomy and physiology of the body through a holistic approach, and weaving together the ancient wisdom of Ayurveda with modern science and herbal medicine. We'll be covering a bunch of our plant friends and allies, the bioregional materia medica. So you'll actually be working with the plants, making medicine, learning all about the body systems, and of course, walking away with really practical tools that you can implement right away to support yourself, your family, your greater community, or your clients if you're a practitioner. So this is awesome for those of you who are in practice and want to dive deeper into nutrition and clinical herbalism. It's also amazing for beginners who actually don't have any interest in becoming a practitioner, because what's so important and critical is that we become our own medicine person, and that we can bring in medicine through food and through our plant allies to support ourselves and our families. With the digestive system intensive, we're going to get into all of the foundations of the system and healthy digestion that is paramount for nearly all health issues. So we'll be covering herbal remedies, whole foods nutrition, and food-based supplements to help bring the digestive system back into balance. But we're also going to be talking a lot about the gut flora and microbiome and a lot of the common digestive symptoms and diseases that we so often see. So you're going to learn how to work with all of that in a really holistic way. For more information on all of that, you can go to the website hawthorne-institute.com, or you can go to my website, wildlyrooted.com/workshops. At the very top of my webpage, I also have tabs, and one of them is a workshops tab. So you can click on that to go to that page and learn more about the Herbal Anatomy series, which you can purchase as a full series, or you can purchase the individual system intensives if you can't make the entire series. So come on down to Southern Oregon, or if you're in the area, we're so excited to jam with you in all things herbal anatomy. All right, so getting back into this episode, we really cover what exactly is trauma. So you're going to hear Liz's definition and perspective on trauma, how it impacts the brain and the body, and why that's relevant for us in our healing work, even if it's years beyond when the original trauma took place, the importance for safety for healing, and the impact of shame, and how do we acquire shame, and how do we heal from it. It's so huge. We're going to cover how to overcome trauma memories permanently. Yes, you can heal from these, and Liz is such an amazing example of that. So she gives some examples from her own life, as well as with clients that she has worked with before. We're also talking about changing thought patterns and the ways that we can literally change our brain so that we can shift thought patterns that have been with us no matter how long. They could have been with us for our entire lives, but really unpacking what is not us and not self, and releasing a lot of the emotions such as fear, which Liz is going to tell us how different ways to release that emotion of fear. so that we can really discover who we are. I see in my practice just how often that disconnection from self, from the truth that we hold, that we might sense it and feel it, and our body's always communicating and wanting to shed what is not serving us. But we need to support our bodies and our inner child and our brains to work through some of these behaviors and patterns that have been shaped and impacted by the trauma that we've experienced in our lives. We have a discussion on triggers, the importance of triggers, and Liz's unique perspective on how triggers can be really helpful for us. Liz also shares more on the brain and information that I know is going to be encouraging and inspiring for you to keep steady on this path, and that while it could be difficult and challenging, there are so many things that we can do and can invite in to help support us. So I hope this serves you and provides not only inspiration, but some ideas and some starting points for helping you on your path wherever you may be in your healing journey. Of course, you can always reach out to Liz directly and inquire, and I highly recommend you check out her book and share it with friends and family and your community, as well as your practitioners and your doctors, because I think that it's so critical that we share this type of information and get people on board who are part of your health team. So often in today's modern medical society, there aren't resources for people dealing with trauma and working through that, especially related to health. If you found this episode helpful or inspiring, I encourage you to share it out, share it on social media. You can tag us at Wildly Rooted, and you can find Liz at Heal for Life Foundation. And let us know how this episode has impacted you and what you have taken away from it. All right, so let's get into this conversation with Liz Mullinar. Hey, welcome back everybody to Feed Your Wild. Today we are speaking with Liz Mullinar. Liz is a survivor of childhood trauma. She's a trauma counselor and the founder of Heal for Life Foundation, which has provided trauma recovery programs for over 20 years. She developed the Heal for Life model in the early 90s when she felt, along with other survivors of trauma, that there had to be a permanent way of healing from the impact of childhood memories. It's regarded as one of the most successful trauma recovery programs in the world and has been independently evaluated to achieve significant long-term improvements in mental health, social and emotional functioning, pain and vitality for people who complete the program. She's an internationally renowned speaker, and you recently presented the model at 2019 International Congress for Attachment and Trauma alongside Dan Siegel and other global experts. Liz, we are so blessed to have you on today.
Oh, lovely to be here.
So I always love to start off with these conversations because this is a heavy topic, trauma. But I love to start off in grounding it into story and how you came into this work. Like, why was it so important for you to create this program and this new book that you wrote, and what brought you here?
Well, you said in the introduction, I'm a survivor of childhood trauma, and you also accurately said what I found as a sort of successful middle-class businesswoman. I was very successful in the film industry. Was that when I suddenly started understanding and recognizing my childhood abuse, I couldn't find really appropriate help. And I thought, goodness, if I can't find good help, as a successful middle-class businesswoman, what happens to people who have less ability than me? And that kind of led in the end to my starting an organization called now the Blue Knot Foundation, which was, I wanted to link up survivors of childhood abuse all over Australia. And then I had about 55 groups going nationally within the year. But just meeting in groups, I found that didn't actually heal you. It was very validating. It meant survivors felt that there were other people in the same boat. But we needed something more. We needed a place where you could actually go and feel safe enough to release the fear and the pain suppressed from childhood. So it led me in the mid 1990s to deciding that I would sell up my business and our house and build a centre which would be absolutely by survivors for survivors, and that I would myself learn and study, and I would find other experts so that we would devise a program which would be effective for us survivors. And one of the things I very early realized on was the most important thing was that it was run by survivors for survivors, so that it's an empowering program. And that's really important because we were disempowered in childhood. So it's really important that we don't have someone telling us what to do.
At what point did it really feel true to you that you had to go on this path? Because I feel like I work with a lot of clients who have had traumatic experiences or dealing with a lot of physiological consequences from that, related to their chronic illness or health challenges. But everybody has their own path. And I'm curious, what was it that really pushed you toward creating this space for healing?
Well, perhaps I'm a doer, because it was just literally that I actually was very ill. I nearly died when I first started recovering memories, because I was so trying to suppress them that I had exactly what you're talking about. I had a very strong physical reaction, but I was coming through it. It was much more my sense of outrage that there wasn't anything for survivors, that there were organizations for heart or cancer or every sort of physical illness. But in Australia, certainly, there was absolutely nothing for healing survivors. And I thought, this is terrible. Why doesn't the government provide healing for survivors? Why are we so ignored? So it really was just a feeling of outrage that made me sell up my business, change my life. It was just that feeling of, it's not fair. Why don't we have the same rights to healing? And I still feel passionately about it, that we are still not given the opportunity to heal as people are with any other illness at all.
I totally agree with you there. I feel like it's such an underserved population of people. And what I see also, especially working closely with other doctors in the medical healthcare system, at least in America, it's more of a disease management system. And there's this total lack of understanding how trauma impacts us on a physiological level with health, but even beyond, obviously. So I'd love to begin to unpack a little bit of what is trauma exactly. I know that there's lots of different types of trauma. This word is thrown around a lot. And I kind of just want to ground us into an understanding of trauma in the way that we're speaking about it today for the folks listening.
So trauma, as defined by neuroscientists, is an event which has more emotion than the brain can deal with, which overwhelms the ability of the brain to adapt, and which appears to be life-threatening. So what is life-threatening to a baby is very different to what is life-threatening to a 10-year-old or indeed to an adult. So for a baby, it's life-threatening if you lose your mother in those first months of life. That is the most enormous trauma. But obviously it doesn't have the same impact on a 10-year-old or indeed on an adult.
And when we're thinking of trauma and how it is held, because, obviously we'll have those instances of trauma, but then we're often feeling the repercussions and patterns that stem from that into adulthood, even if it's years from now. And so I'm wondering how trauma is held in the body and how that impact of the brain and those brain changes actually manifests in terms of, physical symptoms or emotional distress and all of that later in life.
So we have two sides to our brain, the right side and the left side. Trauma is held in the right side of the brain, in the unconscious, non-verbal part of the brain, the part of the brain called the amygdala, or the fear center. Now, when we experience fear, the amygdala releases, doesn't directly, but I'm saying this very simplistically, okay? Mm-hmm. Releases stress hormones. Now, as we get more and more frightened by an event, as it gets close to becoming an actual trauma where it overwhelms us, we have reactions on three parts of our brain. And those are the prefrontal cortex. And when we get to the moment of trauma, the prefrontal cortex is completely cut off. Why does that matter? Because the prefrontal cortex is how we are aware of the consequences of our actions. It's how we're aware of our emotions. It's self-regulation. It's all the things that we are not able to do at a moment of trauma, nor whenever we are reminded of trauma. Now, the second part of the brain that gets cut off is the hippocampus in the left side of the brain. What does this mean? The hippocampus is our sense of self. The hippocampus is like our storage system. It's how we remember things. It also keeps chronologically. It has a sense of time, a sense of place. So at moments of great trauma, the hippocampus is disconnected. What does that mean? It means that we will not remember what's happened, that whatever has happened is held without a sense of time or length of time or without certain details, because without the hippocampus, the amygdala holds that memory in the unconscious in a very different way from how when it's stored as a conscious memory. And the third part of the brain that is affected is what's called Broca's area in the left brain. And Broca's area is our area for speech. It's how we talk. So when it is cut off, that's when we have speechless terror, that complete inability to articulate. Those three are cut off, and also our entire body, the stress hormones go through our entire body, preparing our body physically to either fight the danger, run away from the danger. And so we either, all of our muscles go into action, our digestive system stops, our immune system stops, we get a dry mouth. That's because we're not releasing any saliva. And so the body prepares for action. Now, if there is no release of the fear, the body stores that trauma within this whole tension of one's body, this whole ready to activate part of your brain. So it means whenever in the future we are reminded of the same trauma, and we could be reminded through sound, through smell, through touch, could be a similar event. We could be abused at a birthday party. So every time we're invited to a birthday party, we could be triggered into the same physical and mental reaction. And that's what's so debilitating to us. It's not just the original trauma, but it's every time we are reminded of the trauma, without realizing what's happening, we suddenly go into this tension, into this inability to think, inability to concentrate, inability to remember. And that is what really stuffs up our lives as survivors.
When you're speaking into that, I'm also thinking about how many folks don't even understand or have any concept of connecting what they're going through back to a previous state of, like those traumatic events that they had experienced, and feeling so frustrated of like, why do I act this way? Or why do I feel this way every time XYZ happens? Do you find that most people don't have recollections or aren't making connections in that way? And that's kind of part of what needs to be tracked? Or how do you work through that?
Well, I think triggers are treasures because they give us the opportunity to find out what that is about. So just as a simple example, I just put down the phone just before you connected with me. And I was speaking to this guy, and he'd had a huge reaction to someone telling him he'd spelt something wrong. And I said, "You're triggered by being told you've spelt something wrong. What happened in your childhood? Is it spelling? What is it?" And he said, "Oh, when I was a child, I always did everything wrong, and I still do everything wrong." And so I was able to say, as a child, that's what they told you. It's not true in the now. And for you, it is scary. It is frightening reminder whenever anyone tells you you've done something wrong. So he was having this huge reaction, but he was also blaming himself in the now and thinking that, oh, I never get anything right. But that emotion was from his childhood. It wasn't true of the now. So we often blame the now when it's actually stuff from our childhood that it's about. And that has lots of impacts. If I talk from my own triggering. So one day I was running a workshop, and there was a woman who was holding a doll to represent her baby, which is a very good way of self-nurturing. For whatever reason, my right brain suddenly connected with that baby, and I was triggered. So I went into a complete fight-flight reaction, which I now know in my body. So I went outside and I de-triggered, which is the most important tool for everybody to learn. So what I did was say, I feel scared. I feel frightened. Now, by saying what I felt out loud, I was connecting my right side of my brain to my left side of my brain, to the Broca's area. So that immediately soothed and stopped the stress hormones. So I was able to go back and continue the workshop. Then later that evening, I actually wanted to find out, what was that about? What's that about babies? And I had no idea. I knew that I've never been any good with babies. I've had my own children, but I always kind of said, oh, give me a baby when they're 3 years old. I don't want to hold your baby, thank you. And I just thought that was my personality. I just didn't like babies. And I thought, that's okay. I don't like babies. So anyway, that evening, I went into my right brain, and you get into your right brain through creativity, through visualizations, music, drawing with your non-dominant hand. All of this is in my book, by the way, so I'm saying it quickly, but hopefully anyone listening will be able to follow enough. And with my non-dominant hand, I drew and so started to remember an occasion when I was about 3 years old. And my father took my doll and broke it into pieces because he wanted to sexually abuse me and I wasn't doing whatever it was he wanted me to do. So my little 3-year-old girl, to her right brain, to her fear center, was locked into, don't ever touch babies because you're a bad little girl. And I was very frightened because my father was very angry. So locked in my brain was, don't ever touch babies. So I let my little girl release her fear of my father, her fear of babies. And then I let my little girl do, which is part of the sort of healing process, I empowered her. So she said to my dad, you're a horrid man. You shouldn't have broken my doll. I don't do anything wrong. And that was because I believed if we re-empower ourselves within a memory, then I see it as being stored as a permanent memory of my little girl being victorious. And then I nurtured my little girl and loved my adult self, nurtured my little self. And then the next day I rang up one of my children and I said, bring up your baby, because luckily she had a baby. And I spent the whole weekend holding that baby, loving that baby, and feeling for the first time in my life since the age of 3, a real loving connection with a tiny baby. So, and now I adore babies. Anyone's got a baby, I'm the first to grab it and hold it because I've made that connection. So being triggered by things from our trauma really can profoundly affect all sorts of self-belief systems that we believe are because it's the way we are, rather than, no, it isn't. It's because of what happened to me as a child or to any of you who are listening. So it's huge, the effect of trauma, and it's different for each person, which way they store the memories of their trauma, what are their triggers, but uncovering those triggers, recognizing that whenever I get angry or whenever I get frightened or whenever I find with me I get physically sick, then I'm triggered. And so then it's up to me to try and discover what the trigger is about. And by doing that, I help myself to heal and become the person I was created to be.
Oh gosh, I think you're speaking to something that is so deep. And I know that so many people are journeying with now is that, they know at a deep level that there are these things that are at this, subconscious and deeper levels that are conditionings that are not themselves. And yet they are impacting and informing their life experience because of those beliefs and what they believe their personality is. And so unpacking all of that and discovering who you really are, I have heard from many folks that itself is a scary experience because, it's like it's coming into the unknown. So speaking, of scary in this whole process, one of the things that I have heard from many folks working through their own trauma is that they have a fear of reliving these memories. So I'd love for you to speak to, that whole area of the possibility of reliving or, that you don't even need to relive and that you can work through these without having to go through the initial pain.
Well, if you remember, I said that the part of the brain where trauma is stored has no sense of time. So we don't relive. All we do is visit that moment in time to release the fear. That takes all of 20 seconds. I didn't sit there and go through the whole agony of how my 3-year-old and what my father did, da-da-da-da-da. I just remembered just that one moment of him breaking the doll. This is much less than a minute. But for me, I want to go back and know what the event was. I wouldn't like a system by which I just released the fear because knowing that that was about dolls, it made me understand me. And the whole thing, it's my adult fear of my fear. My little girl was desperate to release that fear. And it's a fabulous experience releasing the fear. It's not a fear to be feared. And that's the biggest handicap to our healing is we're kind of both therapists, I have to say, and survivors are scared of what those emotions might be. And it's realizing that there's nothing to be frightened of. The best thing in the world is to touch the fear we felt in childhood and release it because it's transformational.
Thank you for saying that.
Even for a moment, I'm thinking it's not exactly like childbirth, but in a sense, there's a whole fear around that sort of pain. This is nothing like as bad as childbirth. It's the most liberating and most wonderful thing. Every time I've allowed myself to process a trauma from childhood, I felt so wonderful afterwards. It's like the best ever drug.
Well,
not that I've taken drugs, but if I had, it's that feeling of lightness. And for me, I've let go of that fear and I can embrace love. And it's a different world as we let go of that fear.
Well, I think it's really important for people to hear what you're saying, because I think where like you're speaking to the fear of the fear, but also that people have had not so great experiences when trying to work through that on their own, if they didn't have tools or, like didn't have a safe container. And your book, Heal for Life, How to Heal Yourself from the Pain of Childhood Trauma, is such a wonderful compendium of tools and knowledge, information on healing trauma for people who are just starting on this path. You already touched on a lot of really critical baseline things that we need to know. What are some other practices or ways of supporting ourselves or things that we need to have in place when we're at the starting line?
To work out if you love yourself, because we can't, all healing of our inner self, inner child, whatever you want to call that inner self, can only happen when there's an adult me that is prepared to go there and be the adult that wasn't there when I was tiny. So if I hate myself, if I don't love myself, if I have very little adult self present, then I don't want to, and I'm not able to go back and hold that inner child. So the very first step towards safety and to be able to do this work, and of course, let me just add, the best thing of all is if you find a good trauma therapist, and that's why I'm busy training them all over the world. But it's just a simple thing like looking in a mirror and just saying, I love myself. Many people listening may not even be able to look in a mirror, or may look in a mirror and hate themselves. It's actually just changing those neurons, changing that self-belief, working on thinking every morning, waking up and thinking, I am a worthwhile person. I am lovable. And my adult is going to go back and find out what happened in childhood and love myself. Because so many people hate their childhood, hate who they were. They don't want to go back there because it was so awful. But to heal, we have to go back there. So we have to go back with love for that poor little kid who, even if me as an adult hates my little child, who on earth is ever going to love me or myself? Only I can love myself enough to heal myself. So loving myself is the very first step, I believe, in the healing journey.
Yeah, that's so huge.
And please, I'm not saying it's easy, because for people who weren't loved or nurtured as children, this is not something that's, just love yourself. No, it's very, very difficult. But we have to start somewhere. And it's a good place to start, to know that you are worthy of healing, that you can heal, that you deserve to heal, that you have your own courage to heal. Starting on that, for me, is the starting place for all healing.
And it makes sense, because you cannot have a place of safety if you're not even safe within yourself.
If you love yourself, then you will make sure you're in a safe place. If you don't love yourself, then you stay in an abusive relationship. If you don't love yourself, you don't allow yourself that you have the right to feel safe. So you've got to get to the space, first of all, to decide, I have the right to feel safe. I have the right to change. That's the first decision each person has to make.
I do these monthly intuitive readings. Basically, I use it's called the Akashic Records, but on the podcast, I offer themes that come through. And the theme for February that came through was safety, cultivating a sense of safety within, and also shame. And so I was so pleased to, when I received your book, that you had a whole chapter on this topic. And so I'd love to talk about, what is the impact of shame? Like, how do we even acquire shame and how do we heal from it?
Shame is when we blame ourselves for action. So all children are narcissistic up to the age of about 9. So just like I said, because my father broke my doll, I believed I was bad. Children believe they are the center of their universe. It's a survival mechanism. So we believe we are responsible for what we do. So shame occurs because instead of blaming my father, I was blaming me. So I'm a bad girl. So I have to be ashamed of myself. Healing is starting to recognize nothing that happened in my childhood was my fault. Whenever we let go of anything being our own fault, that's the beginning of getting rid of the shame. Shame is feeling I shouldn't have gone back to the perpetrator. Loving oneself is going, I couldn't do anything else. He was grooming me. She was grooming me. It was not my fault. I enjoyed the sex, so it's my fault. No, virtually every child, when they're sexually abused, nature means that we get some enjoyment out of it. We don't have to feel shame about that. That's nature. So shame comes, I believe, from taking responsibility for what happened to us.
Yes. And acknowledging that, it sounds like it comes back into a lot of that inner self, inner child work that you were speaking to.
It so does, that connecting with that inner self. It's like connecting with my right brain. My left brain to me is my adult. And it's my left brain going in and connecting with my inner self, a little wounded girl who was so hurt when she was little. And I have to work with her and love her and encourage her and say, yeah, you were pretty amazing. You survived. Wow, you were extraordinary. Good heavens, etc. And it's that constant acknowledgement of that's, I think, really important for us. This is work. It's difficult work because it seems a bit silly. I mean, I've got to spend 10 minutes loving my inner self every day. Yes, instead of taking medicine, that's what you do if you want to heal from childhood trauma. So it's hard work, but utterly rewarding. And consistency and persistency absolutely plays off. I have seen it thousands of times, and I know it categorically. The more time we all spend on our healing, the quicker we heal.
And it sounds also, coming back to like the shaping, the patterns of our thoughts and our brains, I am hearing, as we're speaking, I'm just hearing people listening, like with all these questions, right? And how am I going to break through these thought patterns that literally have been running my life since I was little? Like, I don't even know of a reality outside of that. What are some of the foundational practices that you have found to be helpful in breaking through the thought patterns that are, deleterious or negative?
Well, it's very difficult because the first thing we have to do is to do enough love of adult self, etc., to be able to go to that inner child, because the real change starts happening, which encourages us to continue when we start releasing this fear. It's the releasing of the fear that starts getting us to say, no, that's nonsense. I'm not stupid. And questioning our own self-beliefs. But that doesn't really happen until we release the fear. And the other difficulty is that at the moment trauma occurs, locked into this right brain, the amygdala, are also any messages and belief systems. So sometimes we have to unpack a trauma to unpack a belief system. And it doesn't matter how much cognitive behavioral therapy we do, we sometimes can't unlock key things, like the gentleman I was talking about who rang just before this program. I'll talk to him later today because I sent him off to go back to his little boy and let his little boy release the fear of always being wrong. Because until he does that, it doesn't matter how much in the now he says to himself, no, you don't always get things wrong. The belief system is locked into his childhood developmental trauma. So he's got to unlock that, and then he can start really making real change. So we can do so much loving ourselves in the adult self, but we can't change childhood messages until we actually start going into the trauma. That's what I believe anyway. That's why I think cognitive behavioral therapy works for a short time only, and then people feel inadequate if they haven't done the trauma work first.
And when you say release the fear, and I know you gave some examples earlier, I mean, I'm assuming that looks very different for each individual. And I'm hearing people ask, like, how do I release it? How do I release it? You know?
Well, for each person, I'll just tell you a few different ways. Some people squeeze the fear into a towel. Some people are somewhere where they can scream it out. Some people stamp their feet. I really just breathe it out, and I usually cry. I really have great guttural cries releasing my fear. Each person has to think, just let themselves do whatever. Some people, it just kind of floats away from them. We're all different in the way we release fear, but there's nothing to be scared of about in releasing fear. We're letting it go. So for each person, it's different. And for any therapist listening, or you get your therapist to you explore what works for you. For each of us has to find our own way and to feel free enough to think, this is what I want to do and I'm going to do it.
I think it's so encouraging. I mean, not only to have these practices and tools that you have so many in your book, which is so wonderful. And we'll make sure to link up everything so people can find that. But also to have examples of people that have actually worked through trauma and have come out on the other side and are feeling free from a lot of that fear and those chains that they feel like they've been carrying. You are such an amazing example of that. And you also include encouraging information on the brain. So I'm wondering if you could give some nuggets or pearls for people listening who need that inspiration and to know that it actually can happen for them.
So it was only about 25 years ago that scientists discovered that the brain is plastic. What does that mean? It means that we're not born with a brain and that's it, which is what they actually believed. And our whole social welfare, mental health system is predicated, it is created on the understanding that you can't change. Well, this is a lie, because our brain can completely change. Our brain can change and will change as we work with ourselves. So healing is more than possible. Everybody can change, because our brain, what are called neurons, we have 800 or 80 billion neurons in our brain, and they connect up, and we can change the way they connect up. We can change the connections. We can change the way our brain acts, reacts. And the most amazing things happens when you release fear, and I'd love a brain scan immediately before and immediately after, that it's as if, people often say to me, it's almost like they've had an operation on their brain. I always say you need to rest for half an hour after doing this sort of work, because it's as if all the new neurons are connecting up in a different way, and you just need to sort of sit and let them all settle. So every single person listening can heal from their childhood trauma if they want to. And I know the difficulty is that in many places they can't find a therapist who's appropriate. But if you want to heal, if you decide you're going to heal, you can heal. Yes, you can read my book. Then you can start finding out, how am I going to heal? Maybe have Skype sessions with a trauma therapist. Find a way of healing, however difficult. If it's what you want to do, you can heal. There is nobody who cannot heal. So mental illness is not a permanent disability. We have camps for teenage girls, and so many of them have been on what we in Australia called permanent disability pensions, because they've been told you will never get better. So it's my great joy and delight. Quite a few of them have become psychologists. And that's great, because they were told you will never be able to be employable. I mean, what a devastating life sentence to give to people. And that's because people didn't realize that the brain is plastic. And, a good place to start for people who are listening to me and thinking, what's she talking about, is Google, is the brain plastic? Google, learn about the brains, because to understand our brains means we start knowing that we can change. I'm not a wafty new age person who's just I'm talking from scientific knowledge, and that scientific knowledge is available for every single person listening. If they want to Google it and look at YouTubes, you can learn all about your brain and why you can change as a starting point to deciding to change.
1,000%. I'm so glad you're speaking to that. And I want to bridge that back to what we touched on in the beginning, which was what I often see, these complex collections or constellations of symptoms that people experience. or chronic illness related to, either adverse childhood experiences or trauma throughout their life. And you had mentioned that you were experiencing some physical health challenges. Do you have some stories or even sharing your experience with overcoming some of those health challenges by addressing the trauma work?
Well, three things. Firstly, one of the things I know absolutely is that for a lot of people, or people visiting here, so survivors of trauma who suffer from migraine, I believe for a lot of people, when they are triggered, it creates a migraine. And I've showed this again and again and again, because headaches, the part of the brain where headaches emanate from, is a part of the brain, the superior temporal region, which is larger in survivors of trauma. So for me, if you get a migraine, look in the mirror and say, I feel frightened, and see if the migraine goes. Chronic fatigue syndrome, I've got a dear psychologist friend coming up because she's suffering enormously from it at the moment. And I know from my own experience that when I, my adult, refused to acknowledge what had happened to me, my entire body shut down. And I remember my doctor saying to me, oh, well, Liz, it can't be psychological with you. And so they put me in hospital. But I lost massive amounts of weight. I couldn't walk up the stairs. I was in hospital. They were trying to find what mysterious illness it was. It was like my body just gave up. It just said, I'm no longer going to work until you actually address the core issue, because the right brain is dominant. So the right brain, where our trauma is, which holds emotions, is stronger than the left brain. So I see it that kind of, if we ignore our inner self, it will make itself hurt. And physically, whichever way we've got a kind of a way in, it can be for some of us physical, for some of us it will be emotional, but it will nag and nag and nag at us because it wants to survive. And I believe each one of us innately wants to heal. And the agony is when we ignore it, when we have panic attacks or anxiety attacks or migraines or chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia or any of these awful, awful effects of trauma. And as soon as we start healing from the trauma, the effects go. It's wonderful. As soon as I started healing, I immediately was well. And the doctor said, oh, this can't be. They wouldn't accept it was because I hadn't dealt with my trauma. They said, no, you must have had a vowel. And I said, they won't listen. And that's okay. We just have to get on with doing it.
Yeah. And I am so grateful for your warrior spirit in this way, Liz, because, I feel like so many people feel disempowered. I mean, they're already disempowered in the first place from their traumatic experiences. And then, they get disempowered by the systems that they're in or people not believing them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our system society wants to deny child abuse. It started in the 1970s when parents started not wanting to be blamed. And childhood trauma is not a blame game. It doesn't matter who did whatever to me. I'm not blaming my father. My father was sexually abused. I mean, he had his own complete dysfunctionality. Blaming gets us nowhere. So I don't know where I was going with that conversation, but I'll just say that it's my responsibility to heal myself. But I would like society to start supporting me and stop worrying about who we're going to blame and just say, okay, you were abused as a child, let's help you to heal, rather than trying to find the perpetrators and putting the person in jail. That doesn't heal me. That doesn't make me feel better it may, but it won't heal me if my perpetrator goes to jail. It's a perfectly valid thing to do and fantastic if people can, but I don't think they should recognize it as part of their healing process. I think it's just the healing process has to be the releasing of the fear. It may be a small part of it, or it may be validating, but it's not you can't just take your perpetrator to court and then think, because he's gone to jail, now I must feel better, because it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So much bigger. And
I think while we blame perpetrators so much, I think we're stopping healing overall. We're so much into a blame game about those terrible, terrible people who abused us. Yes, it's wrong and it's not okay, but let's concentrate on healing us all. And then, maybe we can start healing the perpetrators, that'd be more effective than locking them all up forever.
Yeah.
Or at least give them a chance.
That's such a huge topic too, just the, rehabilitation and the lack of that in our society. Yeah, that's so huge. Well, Liz, you mentioned so many tools already, and you mentioned some practices like, looking at yourself in the mirror and how you can work with your inner child and breath work and releasing the fears in different ways. I'm curious if currently you have a favorite either nourishment tool or practice or habit that you love right now or you're using with your clients, patients that you would like to share.
Well, I suppose my favorite nourishment tool, which I decided on my 70th birthday, which was to decide every morning before I start the day that I choose everything I do today. And what that did was it removed resentment. It removed that thing of, oh, I have to clean the house today. Oh, I have to go and write that article. Oh, I've got to go and help that survivor. Oh, poor me, I'm too busy. Because at each moment I can say, well, you can choose not to do it, Liz. You can choose to clean the house or not clean the house. And it's been the most extraordinarily liberating thing to do, because it means every moment of every day I am choosing what I do. And that's wonderful. That's my little private tool. It took me 70 years to decide to utilize.
And you are speaking directly to me, Liz, on that one. Calling me out. I'm going to implement that right away.
It really is life-changing. I've just let go of resentment. It's just ridiculous how much better I feel.
Oh, this is so beautiful. Thank you. And on a similar note, we ask everybody who comes on the podcast this question, and that is, what is currently feeding your wild, whether that's body, mind, soul, however you take it?
Feeding my wild. What an interesting question. I think I wanted this question on notice. I suppose I see feeding my wild as being rather adventurous. I see feeding my wild not letting myself not do things because I think I'm a bit too old. So feeding my wild is just pushing the boundaries all the time and making sure I don't stop doing things or inhibit myself because of age. I don't know whether that's what you mean by feeding the wild, but that's what I'm going to take it as.
That's beautiful. I think that weaves into all areas, and that's something that, that's a great reminder for all of us at any age too.
I think getting old is when you allow yourself not to have new thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
When in my day we did this, that, or the other.
Yeah.
That's a terrible, terrible way to be. I'm not going to be that way.
Well, Liz, I'm glad you're not. And your adaptability and your warrior spirit, I think all of that contributes to a beautiful work that you are doing and contributions to this world. So thank you. Thank you for putting out that book. And what are the best ways that people can connect with you and your work as well as the book?
They're welcome. Anyone. I answer emails. My name is Liz Mullinar, MULLINAR, @gmail.com.au, or Liz Mullinar at Heal for Life, or Google Heal for Life. Buy my book first, actually. Read it, and then if you've got any questions or you want encouragement, I'm more than happy to answer people. So I'm really happy to encourage anyone who wants to be given a bit more encouragement to heal.
Mm-hmm. And we'll, of course, make sure that we have all the links in the show notes, especially to your book, so people can start utilizing, implementing it right away. And Liz, thank you so much for your work, for being here, and for your patience, because for listeners, we were having a bit of an issue, tech issues earlier on, and you're such a good sport.
No problems. Nice to talk to you, Vanessa. And I look forward to hearing from some of your listeners when they decide they're going to take the path to healing. So thank you.
Hey there, I made something for you. One of the biggest challenges that I hear from people is that they are feeling stuck when it comes to their health. You're a smart, capable, and creative change maker, right? And you know what you should be doing for your health. So what gives? Well, it's not about willpower. And I wanted to create something that would help you to unlearn the things that are keeping you stuck so that you can get out of your own way and master the mindset of health. That's why I created Wildly Unstuck, where you'll learn the top 5 things that I have found to sabotage your health goals and what to do about them. You'll learn what it really takes to become committed and unstoppable when it comes to your health goals and find the clarity you've been looking for so you know exactly what to do to get back into alignment. And I made it totally free. So if this is something that you want to dive into and create a vision and soul goals for your health and your life and bring your gifts to the world, because we know that we need it, then I invite you to join us in Wildly Unstuck. You can find that at wildlyrooted.com/unstuck. I'll see you on the other side.